Hi, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. If there's a slight look of panic on my face, that's because there's a lot of panic in me, because James, for God's sake, has got a life of his own and he's not here tonight. So I'm in the throes of abandonment and panic and having to somehow manage the technical side of things myself. But luckily, I've got a highly skilled therapist with me. Hello, Sam, who I can just turn to at any point once I fall apart, and she'll sort me out, won't you? I'll get it for free as well. That's
Obviously.
great. Obviously, that's right. It's going to be a masterclass in how to deal with somebody completely overwhelmed by anxiety. So take it away, Sam. Anyway, welcome to the Wellbeing Show. Just to say, this is a live podcast. We keep it live because we'd like you to be involved. It won't be the same wonderful service in terms of James and everybody sort of checking out the various streams. And also, we're not on Facebook at the moment because Mr. I can't cope with technology managed to get himself logged out of his Facebook page. There you go. I'm hoping it stops being angry with me, because I'm fairly sure Facebook is just angry with me and won't talk to me at the moment. I'm hoping it gets over its anger and lets me in over the next few days. So tonight you have only one stream, which is on YouTube, because YouTube loves me and I feel okay with that. So that's what you've got. So drop comments in, but I'm just looking at it. I can't see where the live stream is. James assured me I'd be able to see it, but that's how useless I am, to be honest. But I can see that we're live, and it'd be lovely to hear from you. The best way to join in is by dropping me a WhatsApp, to be honest. So that's 07506 319 745. That's +44 7506 319 745. Be lovely to hear from you. Enough of that, enough of my incompetence, and on to somebody who knows what they're doing. Samantha Garner is joining us this evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Hello.
Hiya.
Been itching to shut me up, haven't you?
Not at all.
Yes, you have. I can see it in your face. Quite right, too. Lovely to have you on, Sam. You're a cognitive behaviour therapist.
Cognitive behaviour therapist, and sort of I do a lot around sort of grief and bereavement, amongst other things. But I'm here tonight to talk with you about grief and bereavement.
Yeah, and anxiety monsters growing out of your head.
Anxiety monsters behind me, looking up high, ready to have it zipped in its mouth and then enclosed.
So tell me how that works. She told me before the show.
So what you do, I'll get it for you.
Do.
And what you do is, I mean, it's for children, but you can use it with adults. And I'm
going to use it. I'm going to buy one.
Beautifully manicured nails that I had done there yesterday. But you open the mouth and you put your anxiety and your worry in there and you zip it up and the monster eats it. Now, obviously, you've got to get somebody else to take it out for you, but that's it. He will eat your anxieties, and
he's available on Amazon.
Amazon, right? Anywhere, lots of great places. He is available.
Wonderful. So that's already sort of really useful tools and resources for people. So there you go. Start as we mean to go on. And we're going to be, and you work in education with children, and you work in the corporate sphere.
I work in the corporate sector and I work in education. I'm very much about making mental health and wellbeing accessible.
Yeah.
And sort of
because there's no point in it otherwise, is there?
No point, is it? So I'm kind of bridging the link between very clever people who use posh language and the normal person on the street, and sort of making it accessible and how they can use it and find out what works for you.
Without dumbing it down, because I've talked to you. You don't dumb things down.
No, you don't need to dumb it down. And
I'm just intrigued. I'm out of interest.
Yeah.
Why do you stay with cognitive behaviour therapist as opposed to psychotherapist or counsellor or something?
Because I love cognitive behaviour therapy. Now, I know it's not the answer to everything, right? Yeah. But for me, it underpins so much of what I do. And I just think so much therapy is basically cognitive behaviour therapy, but just adapt. You know how in the mental health world, we like putting posh names and adapting things and calling it DBT and ACT and everything. But the principles are kind of the same. So, and a lot of people know what cognitive behavior therapy is.
Yeah.
So that's why I stick with that one.
And CBT, as it's shortened to, was a big revolution in psychotherapy, full stop.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, it's partly because you love it, but it's also partly to try and make that distinction. You're not trained in the old psychotherapy model.
No, I'm not. And I'm very much the positive psychology sort of side of things. And
do you mind just talking about that a little bit? Because I think it's useful for people to know.
Yeah, positive psychology works on very much a case of, instead of looking at what's wrong with you, is looking at how you want to be. Instead. So instead of a deficit model, and I'm very big on the language we use as well. So, and that's an important part of cognitive behavior therapy. Instead of saying, I don't want to be like this, let's look at what you do want to be like, and let's use that language, because that's already starting to feel different. So instead of saying, I don't want to be shy, you're saying, I want to feel comfortable talking to people.
Yes.
Well, instantly there has a different feel to it, and you're looking at it differently. Now, I know positive psychology, as with anything, is not for everybody, and it's not the right answer, but I kind of like it. I like it as an easy access.
I'm with you. And I'm very much in the asset-based model myself. I think it's much more effective. I also think it's much more pro-social, to be honest.
Yeah, totally.
Because it encourages to look out, find connection, find engagement and relationship. And I think that, for me, is the huge shift that took place from Freud to now.
Yeah,
was that we went from a model that he had, that you're born with stuff and then society messes you up, which is essentially what he said, to no, actually, we're evolving and changing throughout the whole of our lives. What we're born with are capacities to be social animals. And the more we engage with that, the better off we are, to be honest.
And I don't want to sit there and tell you what's wrong with you.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sit there.
No, you want to tell what's wrong with me.
Well,
I know
that's
that.
a whole other
we did that before the show. I've got a long list of things that are wrong with me.
One there. We could do. Tell me about your childhood.
Yeah.
No, I think the thing is, and I've completely lost track of thought now of what I was going to say. That's the middle-age menopause thing. I don't want to tell you what's wrong with you. I want to guide you in a conversation to empower you to find your own way and find what works for you. And I'm much more comfortable within that model personally.
And you mentioned menopause, so we may come on to that as well.
Oh, I'm sure it'll come up.
Yeah. So were you born a therapist? Is that how you got into it? Or did you?
I think I was. I do genuinely. I think I was. I'm not.
I meant it as a joke, and now it's like, okay.
I genuinely. Okay, no, I wasn't born a therapist, but however, I had a massively privileged childhood and a massively supportive, big family, big network, loads of love, and I always felt the need. I want everybody to have that. Does that, without saying wishy-washy and touchy-feely, and people going, "Oh my God, this woman's already annoying me." I just want to spread it. I want to help.
Yeah.
And I like people.
It's what some people call secure attachment.
Yeah. Oh, massively so. I mean, Enid Blyton, I grew up in deepish Derbyshire, Gloucestershire, and, it was so Enid Blyton, it was ridiculous. And I've got 37 first cousins. We knew everybody in the village.
Lashings of ginger beer somewhere.
Lashings of ginger beer and, picnics and fishing in the river. It was pathetic, but it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And I want to pay that forward.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It's very nurturing, and that's what we do.
It's also, I think there is a real issue here, that mental health is not simply the absence of symptoms that are distressing.
Yeah.
Much more than that. Yes, symptom management, reducing distressing symptoms, is a real thing that we need to engage with. And I think modern evidence-based therapies that you've mentioned are brilliant at that.
Yeah.
So, and they can give people what they want. They do what they say on the tin. They really do.
And there's so much, though. You find what works for you. That's what, if it's not CBT, great. If it is CBT, great. If it's ACT, whatever it is that works for you, do it.
But the principles, I think, like you say, are pretty much the same, isn't it? There's the four pillars, which is psych ed, which is learning about stuff, psychological stuff, learning about your own symptoms. There's behavioural changes or behavioural activation. There's exposure work, which is don't run away from things that you're afraid of, face them. And number 4, I always forget. It'll come back to me.
Motivation for me is a big one as well.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, there's a lot I've started doing more recently on motivating people to want want it to be different. Like you've talked about discomfort tolerance, but actually wanting to be different is part of goal setting and visualizing what it looks like.
It's interesting. I was onboarding a new member of staff this morning into my service, and we were discussing this issue about somebody who has a desire to have their own home, their own partner, their own family, etc., etc. And this is the motivation, and I know that is, when we've got that, we're going to win.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what else is a problem, we'll overcome it. If somebody has that vision or goal for themselves in life, particularly a vision and goal like that, which is, pretty much standard.
It's a great.
I just want to be part of the world. Great. Well, we can make it happen, We
haven't all got to be all singing, dancing, marvelous people that, let's just be normal and live your life.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that one of the things I learn a lot from people who've had stuff taken away from them because they've got severe and enduring mental health problems, etc., it is the value that people put in the commonplace and everyday. And until you've had that taken away from you, you don't really understand. And I think it is something people can empathise with now, because we went through the pandemic together, and suddenly we had lots of things removed from us for our own protection, of course. But now we can maybe empathise with that. But this attachment, this desire for the everyday, the commonplace is real, and it's a good thing. And I sort of remember it in my own personal journey, moving from being weird, and I still am, but not as weird as I used to be, being out there and dramatic, and then actually just like, I can't think of anything better than, we were talking about this before the show, just sitting quietly with my boy, him playing on his Nintendo, his gaming console. No, it's not the BBC. I can call it what it is. Nintendo Switch.
Other gaming consoles are available.
That's right. But if Nintendo want to give me some stuff for him, that's fine as well. And then just sitting quietly with him and just sharing time.
Yeah.
Now, if you just said to me in my 20s, that's what I'd value, I'd thought you were weird. But
look at Mrs. Hinch. No, do you know who Mrs. Hinch is?
No, tell me that.
She is an Instagram star, right?
Okay.
And she has millions and millions of followers, and it's all about her living her life and cleaning and her life with her children.
Get out of here.
That's what it's about. She is an amazing woman. She's an amazing woman. And she's done massively well because she made it okay to, I just want to live in my house and I want to clean and I decorate and I buy things from B&M and I buy things from Primark. And she made this okay for so many people.
Good for her.
And she's done fantastically well, and so many people related to that.
Yeah, I'm with that. I guess my point about you being born a therapist wasn't a serious one. It was really about, well, what was the journey that got you from there to the point where 20 plus years ago, I think it was now, you trained as a therapist. So I would be interested in that. And then we'll probably shift focus on to thinking about not just the technical therapies, but how you became interested in grief and bereavement. Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. For me personally, it was always about connecting with people. I love people. I think I've got an ability to connect with people, to put people at ease.
Sure.
And I wanted to understand more about that. I'm very much somebody, I'm always trying to learn something new. And I wanted to understand more about that and to be able to help people more with that.
Yeah. When
I was working in education, I kind of had an affinity with the more vulnerable groups of children that would be called the behavioural issues. And I wanted to understand how that all came about and to be able to help them in a more proactive way. So that's when I decided to undertake the qualifications that I did. And I'm still sort of, like you are now, pursuing extra knowledge. There's always something else I want to know, and what can I do, and then how can I use that to help people.
And so did you go on to train as a psychologist or?
No. So I did the cognitive behavior therapy, and then I did a counselling course locally as well. Okay. So I did those over several years, and I kind of use it. I didn't do a lot of one-to-one practice, but I use it to help organizations, to help groups, to help people understand how to support children.
I mean this question seriously.
Yeah, go on.
Because there's a joke I made once in an arts therapies department I was working in, where I walked into a meeting and they were all highly qualified, highly experienced therapists, and not one person said, "Hi, how you doing?" And I said, "Oh, yes, we've all had our social skills surgically removed by our training, have we?" And people looked thunderous, but it's the truth, right? Yeah. It's like, so it didn't remove when you did the training, it didn't actually remove your capacity to be warm and kind to people.
I didn't want to do a PhD. I didn't, you know, I wrote a book instead, but part of the reason is I didn't want to get stuck in the academic research language mindset, which is hugely important, but is not where I'm going with that. Okay. That's not what I wanted to use it for. I still wanted to remain, I don't know, like real and accessible.
I call it relational.
Yeah.
Is that okay to call it that?
Totally, completely, and utterly.
Yeah.
So that was
the reason I think about it in those terms is because neuroscience tells us very clearly that one of the reasons any therapy works is we form a strong enough bond with somebody else's frontal lobes so that the frontal lobes will tolerate being placed in a strange position and will adapt and grow. Yeah.
You know how I think of it, Noel? It's like, you know, the Guardian newspaper is wonderful, very left-wing, very in case of supporting people who have had adversity and vulnerable groups. But the irony is the language that they use is so academic.
Completely inaccessible to those groups.
That's completely inaccessible to those groups.
And also, even if it was translatable, would horrify those groups of people.
Exactly.
Like, you mean me? You talk about me like, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that was a conscious choice I made.
I get it.
Not to do that.
I think that's really appropriate. That's a really appropriate statement. It's because it's not criticizing God. It's great. I mean, I don't read it very much because I know exactly what it's going to say in any subject. And there's only a certain amount of time I've got in any one day, and so I'll read things that might make me think as opposed to confirm my own prejudices. But there's something about how it's an old word from my psychodynamic training called omnipotence, that people are getting too much training are just acting out on their omnipotent sense of power more than anything else. And we don't use terms like that anymore, but I think it's appropriate in this situation.
Yeah, I do agree,
You know, there's a certain, because I'm regulated by the Health and Care Professions Council, and their concept is this, that your training needs to make you safe to practice, because it's in your practice that you're going to learn how to do the job.
Yes.
And it's your CPD, it's your ongoing training throughout your real world practice actually is what makes you good at what you do, but your training should be at a certain level. And I think there is a genuine problem with psychology training that is postdoctoral, and the assumption is you'll be postdoctoral.
Yeah.
Because I find it really fascinating. I mean, I guess people are more humble than me who've got their postdoctoral thesis, who then go and do common or garden CBT type therapy with somebody when they're a really, really clever blogs. I'm not sure I'd be able to be that humble.
Are you insulting me there, Noel? I'm just wondering, by calling CBT common or garden, that I haven't got a PhD. I'm just wondering if that's actually a clever insult.
No, there's nothing clever about my insults. They're like steel-toe capped boots that slam on you. There's really nothing intelligent. No. I mean, I think common or garden is where it needs to be. Really. Genuinely. I mean, I think that helping people isn't all that complicated as people would like to make out.
It's really not.
Yeah. There are a certain number of small group of stuff that you need to do. And I think that the research is really important because, you know, I know somebody who did research on how certain proteins, fatty proteins, affect the generation of new brain cells in the brain.
Yeah.
And that's really clever.
Yeah.
And it's really clever for and it was all about in utero and postpartum development of children. It's really clever for medical stuff, and it's really clever in terms of thinking about how, because, you know, neurogenesis is very important. And so I get it, but it's not something you necessarily use if somebody's really scared of walking across the road to the shops. It's really important, but it's not that useful. It's important in the sense that research is important.
Yeah.
In the field of research. And I think that the research in our field has grown, and that's fantastic. And to the point where the British Psychological Society can say with some certainty that the old theory of mental illness as a disease in the brain is unreal, doesn't exist, doesn't make any sense at all, and we need to get rid of medical interventions completely. And they're right.
Yeah. Well, interesting, except a lot of that, we're off the track here, but it was so interesting. But a lot of that, like the neuroscience and the autonomic nervous system and the polyvagal theory, I'm using to give people a real scientific explanation as to why they feel like what they do and how their anxiety manifests itself and how they can improve their vagal tone. So people understand the science behind it because of the phenomenal research that has taken place. And if they can understand it, like you said, the psychoeducation element of it, then they can move forward.
But it is necessary to have that research and have the science.
Massively.
And I think the science is showing more and more that the old notion of a chemical soup theory of mental health is wrong.
Yeah.
And that mental health is much more about, yes, it's capacities and stuff within us, but it's more and more we're understanding its environmental impact, relationships, etc., and the whole idea of epigenetics and trauma and how trauma changes our genetic coding and all that. So, but you're right, we're off the track. It's fascinating. It's good to talk to somebody. It's good to talk to somebody who's intelligent, and I suppose that's partly why we're having this conversation the way I am, because you're deceptively comfortable, and people might get the wrong impression that you don't know what you're talking about. And you actually do know what you're talking about.
Somebody told me I give off country girl vibes.
Yeah.
Okay, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure, but they said no, it was nice. So
it's a good thing. But it's also, I think, really important and because I'm one of those people, I'm very good at translating to accessible language. It's one of my great skills. And then sometimes people think I'm not very clever because of it. I'm very clever, but I don't need to prove it. And I think that's really important. But there's a lot of thought and science behind what you're saying. And I want people to understand that it is really important. Just because you're not cold and forbidding and using long, complicated words doesn't mean you don't know your shit. You actually do. And
obviously don't be distracted by my beauty either. Yes. There is a brain there as well.
I didn't want to go there because I'm just so overwhelmed.
I needed to be said.
As soon as we talk about it, I'm stunned by it. It's like a rabbit.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot.
You're walking down the street in Devon a bit.
Everywhere.
And you've decided to interpret that as they fall in love with you.
Obviously.
That's fine. I think that's a really good reframing that you're doing.
Positive psychology.
Exactly. And when they fall over dead, that's amazing. I've done such a wonderful There was actually, I've got to tell you this. You remember John Peel, the great John Peel?
Yes.
He had that Sunday morning radio show where he interviewed various odd bods from around the UK. It's brilliant. And he had a London black cab driver who'd had 4 bypasses, and then he'd got really well. And John was interviewing and said, and now you've been really healthy, you've not needed another heart bypass. He said, how did you do that? And the guy said, well, you know all that screaming and shouting that I used to get wound up about? I decided it was applause.
Love it. Absolutely.
His whole world changed because he decided it was applause.
Love it.
So whenever somebody was hitting the horn or screaming or giving him the finger, he was like, thanks, that's great. No more heart bypasses.
See that CBT in action there.
It absolutely is genius, isn't it? It's absolutely genius. And I love that. But that's the power of our mind. We can do things like that, can't we?
Yes.
We absolutely can do things. So you trained, you didn't buy into the omnipotence, which is great. You remain grounded and accessible. And I guess you intuited, and now you know that it's the relationship that carries the work, not the other way around.
Yeah. Huge. Well, I mean, all the research shows that the relationship with any therapist is just as, if not more important than the methodology used.
But we should also make this point, and I don't know if you agree with me, but It's not only the relationship.
No.
So some people only have the relationship, and they're charismatic healers who can work well with some people, but they're very limited.
Yes.
You need the relationship as well as the tools and resources.
And it becomes dependent on the relationship. And it's kind of like with any counselling.
Yes, that's right.
The exit strategy is just as important as anything else.
Yeah, because you should be planning the end from the assessment interview. That should be very clear. Unless, of course, there's some long-term issues that need ongoing support. Again, you would do that in the assessment, but only having the relationship isn't good enough.
No, isn't enough.
Tools and resources. Okay, it's that art thing, isn't it? You need the burning desire for your art form, but you need to go and learn the craft.
Yeah, definitely.
How to draw that circle on the wall freehand is really important. You've got to know how to do that. You've got to know how to draw the eyes and the face and all of that sort of stuff. So there we are. You train, you maintain your focus on that, and you get involved in education and corporate sector. In a sense, I can't imagine how those. I can think. I mean, we've talked about it before the show, but how on earth did you get involved in what seems like two completely separate worlds, education and corporate?
Do you know, I don't think it is, because I think the fundamentals that underpin mental health are really, really good, are really similar, whether they're your children or your adults. And I'm a big fan of self-determination theory, which is like the 3 key principles of relationships, autonomy, and purpose. And I think that's the same whatever age you are. But I kind of view myself, Noel, as I'm like a GP. So almost like the first or second level of mental health support, and I give a general overview and ideas of how to support yourself. But if people want more specialist support, then they'll go to you. So I'm making it kind of accessible and signposting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense to me.
And I think so. There is a huge amount of crossover. And when I'm talking to teachers about student mental health, they're always applying it to themselves anyway. So when I talk about various theories and ideas, they're always applying it to themselves anyway. So it is the same. And a lot of people, when I talk to workplace mental health, the concept that they have about themselves all began before the age of 16. So for me, it is fundamentally the same.
I think of it as well in terms of systems. We know, because what happens is we have primary, secondary, tertiary attachments to our siblings and the wider clan grouping, which are the stepping stone. And now we would include school in that. And school is the prep and stepping stone into work. And in work and school, in terms of interpersonal dynamics, we very much bring our family into school, and then we take that to work, and all of those get played out. And that's how we map it. Very few people can operate at the large organizational level. Most people are working at small group level, particularly in large organizations, that you'll find it's groupings of desks or interest groupings of people. Is that your experience?
Yes.
And that's very much it. People are playing out their family patterns, they're playing out their school patterns still. And all of those things are just being replayed and that's fine. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that's the way we are. And then you get those C-suite level people who have that strange ability to look at broad human movements, and they're interesting people. They're a sort of interesting group in and of themselves. Because they're not operating at that level of just these small clan type environments. So I can see why you would do it. Because they're essentially the same, I think.
Very much so. Just
different ages, but that's physical age, not necessarily emotional age.
Well, there you go. I mean, that says it all as well, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely. I'm not sure how emotionally we do grow, or maybe that's just a projection from myself onto the world. And then somehow within this, so this desire to bring scientifically grounded psychological theory and practice to these environments that desperately need them, because they're high-pressured environments, both of them. You segue into working in grief and bereavement.
It kind of happened that I was working. Children who lose parents is so much more common than people think. And so it kind of then worked into working with children who were grieving and had suffered bereavement, and then working with the families as well.
Oh.
And then somebody said to me, can you run a training course on it for schools and for companies and organizations who experience a lot of bereavement as part of their role, so particularly the care industry.
Okay.
And then with COVID and a high level of grief and bereavement, that's kind of how it's focused now.
Okay. And so tell me about grief and bereavement and your understanding of it. And
bereavement is the loss. Okay. So what we're actually talking about is grief. So bereavement is the loss and grief is the process you go through.
And some people talk about you can be bereaved from just about anything. Do you agree with that? Or
loss of identity is a grieving. All right. So I'm on my second marriage. So I had a grief period after my first marriage because my life had changed. The world wasn't how I expected it. And so I went through a sort of a grief process for that. People, when they lose physical autonomy or financial autonomy, or, find out you can't have children, that is a grief process. So it is the loss of an identity or a person that's close to you can stimulate the grief process.
And I was reading as well, going back in time, grieving rituals and processes in anthropological terms very much mark the beginnings of human culture. So anthropologists will look for early human cultures where they have grave decorations.
Yes.
And that's a true human culture because a grave decoration is a marking of a bereavement and a grief ritual. Yes.
And it's very much about for the survivor.
Yes.
It's about for the people around it. It's not about the person who's died. It's about helping those who are grieving adjust, because it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment process.
So it's somehow a loss in terms of our personality, because there are things that make us up who we are.
Yes.
Out there in the world.
If you talk about Maslow's triangle and hierarchy of needs, feeling safe is of paramount importance to us. Sure. And so when our world changes, we feel unsafe because, hang on, it's not as I thought it was going to be. And I have it is a period of adjustment. So if you have, they kind of say, if you have complicated grief, which is one of the only mental health issues related to grief, you can get depression and anxiety.
We're going to come to whether grief is a mental health problem or not.
But complicated grief, it's an adjustment disorder. Yeah. It's the ability to adjust to the changing situation.
Which people may complicate by things like mummification is a process that people refuse to grieve.
There's loads of different types of grief. You can have delayed grief, you can have masked grief, you can have complicated grief. There's lots of different forms. The key is it's not a process that can be avoided, and it's not a process. I think people have difficulty supporting grief because they don't know how to make it better. Yeah. And you can't make it better.
Yes, that's right.
You have to feel the pain. Yes. You have to go through the process.
Okay, so let's come back to that, because you're a mental health professional who trained in mental health tools to help people feel better, because that's what CBT does. I mean, it's a brilliant set of tools. If you're depressed or anxious and you're listening to this, go find yourself a good CBT therapist and you'll sort it out in no time at all. Promise you. But grief isn't an illness that needs treatment. Is that correct?
No, it's not. It is a process that has to be gone through. Okay. And
the process is because there's a loss of identity.
The loss of identity, the adjustment, the change to your life, the change to your routine, which makes you feel unsafe. The shock that like the adjustment is what I'm trying to say, that you're different now. Your life is different to how it was, and you feel unsafe and you feel pain as a result of that.
And it's a shocking sudden transition, and therefore difficult because it happens quickly, as opposed to one that might happen over a long period of time?
I mean, the thing is with grief, it's personal to everybody.
Okay.
So it very much saying that. So I've had conversations with people, and my dad died or my mum died and they were really old and they had a good innings, and I shouldn't be sad. Of course you should be sad. Don't feel that you should be less sad, because we all have different coping mechanisms. We all have different levels of what we feel. You know, we're all wired differently.
But I guess thinking about that specific situation,
yeah,
and the difference between that, say, and complicated grief or grief that is delayed or something, I guess if an individual has had time to get to know about the death of somebody, they've got a lot of closure, there's no sense of which, I haven't had that conversation I need to have, and you're working with the person on having a good passing, and that happens. I guess for me, intuitively, that suggests that you're going to have probably just a smoother grieving process. There'll be ups and downs. You will grieve naturally and normally, and nothing will complicate it.
It depends on how well you adjust.
Okay.
So if you have a capacity to adjust to a new life,
okay, all right,
then you're going to have an easier grieving process.
Okay.
There's lots of elements to do that, but there's something called anticipatory grief as well, which can be more complicated. So somebody is going to die.
Yeah.
And you're starting the grieving process then, but you feel guilt. I can't be feeling sad now. I have to make the most of the time they have left. So that can complicate the grief as well. Sure. So there is a precursor. You're more likely to develop a mental health issue from grieving if you have a higher risk of anxiety and depression before, or if you have a high number.
That's true of everything, right?
That's true of everything. The more
if you have a predisposition because you've experienced depression, if you go through any stressful event, it may pop up again. And people who've had previous depression really need to hear that and have plans in place so they can spot if they're going into depression and have support in place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Completely. So
would the same be true of other mental health problems? So let's say somebody had an eating disorder when they were younger, then they go through a grieving process. Is there a likelihood? Not likelihood, but is there a possibility you could trigger it?
Traumatic events
okay.
can lead to a change. If you, I don't know if you watch Hoarders, but I watch a lot of Hoarders programs because it makes my house feel tidy.
I don't watch it because I'm just too much like it.
Okay, I love it. Okay, but
it's like seeing myself up on the screen.
look at your minimalist background there. I don't believe a word of that.
It's an emotional hoarding. I do not physical
that's
hoarding.
fine. You do that, but it's like they all start hoarding after the loss of something, a divorce, a health thing, a loss of a parent.
Yeah, a mate of mine did that, and she's
not feeling safe, and that they start hoarding, as I say. So eating disorders, self-harm can also be triggered by the loss.
So people need to be aware of those things. And why are we raising these issues? People go, you make me feel anxious. We're raising these issues because we know this stuff.
Yeah.
And if we know this stuff, if you know this about yourself, if you have this insight about your own personal history, and you put in place things to support you, if you have vulnerabilities and you put in place extra props, you're less likely to crash badly and severely for a very long time. And you may not crash at all.
No.
You may indeed have the preventative resources in place that prevents the crash.
Yeah.
It won't stop you grieving, though, which is the message.
It won't stop you, and it has to hurt. It has to hurt. And that's really hard.
Yeah.
I think because we are looking, and if you're supporting somebody going through, you want it to stop hurting.
Yeah.
And it won't.
Okay.
I think one thing as well is that about grief, there's something called grief from stigmatized death, and a lot of people struggle with the grieving process if there's been a stigmatized death. So this is whereby somebody decided to take their own life, or their death is a result of drug or alcohol addiction. In society can be very much a case of, well, it was their choice. And it's like, but but I'm still grieving, and people are less likely to accept help. If, say, you have a relative in prison, they have less value to society, and therefore when they die, well, society is better off. So the person who is grieving cannot do it publicly and is likely to have less support from people for it.
I'm part of a charity called Drug Fam, which was set up precisely for that reason, because the founder had twin sons, one of whom killed himself after relapsing and is using, and nobody wanted to hear about the fact that she was in bits.
No. And they're less like
nobody, and it was like the reactions she got from the police were, "Thank God he's gone." I mean, literally, it was awful.
And that this is a human being, you know.
So they have these grief conferences every year.
Fantastic,
where people can do this, and that's why it happens. And there's a new one coming out this year, folks. Look out for Drug Family if you go through this experience. It's amazing. Elizabeth Burton Phillips, "We Are Not Worthy." And there are these extraordinary people in the world. Elizabeth is one of them, who transform these horrific events in their life into something beautiful and golden that is healing for other people. I mean, I couldn't. I'd dig a hole, jump in, and you wouldn't see me. Do you know what I mean? But they're amazing people. I love them. I'm really fascinated by that type of person who manages to transform horror into something beautiful. I mean, they're quite extraordinary,
isn't it?
Yeah, it's extraordinary stuff. So thinking about that stigmatized group, would that also be in that family of events that's broadly called disenfranchised grief?
Yes.
Where people say, "Oh, I shouldn't," like a grandmother whose her grown-up son's child dies, for example. You're the grandmother and you say to yourself, "Oh, it's my son, he's the father, he should be grieving. I shouldn't be grieving. I shouldn't interfere with the grieving with my own feelings." It's that type of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And not allowing yourself to grieve, we're very good at thinking other people are worse off, so therefore I shouldn't really moan. But your grief is your own personal experience, and you should be allowed to go through it.
And here's one for you. How would you call this? So mental health professionals who experience loss, who then tell themselves that they shouldn't be feeling this because they process everything.
Do you know what? It's and I've done the same. I'm kind of thinking, right, I know all this stuff. I know all this shit. I know this. That's right. It's not. So if it happens to me, I'm going to deal with it. Oh my God, am I going to deal with it? Okay. Now, my eldest daughter has just finished an 8-year relationship with her boyfriend, and supporting her massively. But I was grieving because he was part of our life, and I loved him. Yes, of course,
absolutely.
And I was crying, and I was like, "But this hurts. I shouldn't be doing this. I'm a professional. I know this stuff, you know." But then it's really like, no, I have to feel the pain as well.
Yeah, because you're a real human being, right? Exactly.
I am a human being, and if I wasn't, I wouldn't be very good at what I do.
Yeah, no, exactly. I remember it's really interesting. I went through the ending of a relationship myself some years ago. We're good friends now. We're co-parents and all that sort of stuff. And I was doing some couples therapy at the time. One of them said, "You're not very good at relationships, then, are you?"
What a great
I went, "Well, we'll see. This one isn't working out the way I'd planned it, but we're going to work on maintaining our relationship as friends and as co-parents and put our child first," which is what we did. So we maybe don't have the relationship we thought we were going to have, and it was painful and difficult, but we stayed together in a relationship, and that was important.
You know what the thing is with professionals as well?
I wouldn't loftily call myself a professional. I'm sort of just below it.
Pretend professionals. Is that what we like to do? Is we like to think we don't need help.
That's right.
We're helping other people. Now, inspirational that happens.
I don't need help. What are you talking about, Samantha? Are you trying to suggest I need help?
Would I?
For God's sake, woman, stop it.
But I feel we could do a series of these, but that's a separate issue. So 12 years ago, fell off a horse, broke lots of bones, pelvis, disabled for ages, lost all my hair, yada, yada. And I struggled I struggled needing help from other people.
Did you?
I really did. Went from a strong, forthright woman to, babe, can you help me get on the toilet? Which is a big, thing. And I went to counselling, and this counsellor lady, amazing. She said, Sam, you like helping other people. I said, I really like helping other people. And she said, other people like helping you. So allowing them to help you is your gift to them.
Yeah, brilliant. Love that.
Loved it.
That's like, oh, no, it's applause.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so now it's like, it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay, so I suffer with depression. I talk about my depression journey, and people say, thank you for talking about it, because I can see that you have depression, but you're not a blibbering mess or anything like that, that you can appear normal with it. And, and
I mean, I think it is important, because, I mean, I've come in and out of anxiety and depression over the years. I went into a period during the pandemic. I knew I was going to. I took medication prophylactically. I spoke to my GP about it. It works for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me. And I did all of those things because I don't want to end up off the cliff anymore.
No.
I just don't need to fall off that cliff and get broken in the same way that I seemed to need to do when I was younger. And I think that's really important. I think it is important that as health professionals, we're able to open up about. In fact, I remember, this is going back, so long ago. There were pterodactyls were still flying around, and but when I worked for Islington Council, way back before the meteorite blew out the planet, the Mental Health Trust, the Paddington. Down at Paddington Station, no, St Pancras Station, St Pancras Hospital was the Mental Health Trust, still is. They were encouraging, and this is 25 years ago, they're encouraging senior managers in the trust to talk about their own mental health struggles, because the evidence was very clear that the more you talk about it in an appropriate, professional, health-oriented manner, the more you encourage people to get help sooner. And we know the sooner you get help, the less chronic your problem is, the less intervention you need, the quicker you're going to get healthier, the less chance of a relapse that you'll end up in some very severe, etc., etc. All the outcomes are better the sooner you can access something. And
citalopram, love it. And it's great. Life's hard enough without being miserable.
I totally agree with you. And the great thing is, though, that now we have psychological therapies that are very effective. And so effective, folks, that NICE, that wonderful body that we love to hate, have updated the guidelines on the treatment of anxiety and depression to make psychological therapies the first choice for GPs. Before medication. I have to say, as a practitioner, I think there still should be an assessment there. And I like the PHQ and GAD scoring system. If you're in the severe end, I think it's a really good conversation to have with people about using SSRIs to help reduce that. Because the amount of energy that's involved in just getting through the day when you're feeling very ill.
Huge.
Do you know what I mean? And it can just actually give you a boost.
And it means if you can get in the right, if medication can help you get in the right mindset to access the therapies, great.
I'm all for it. And I mean, I used to work in acute wards, and you wouldn't be able to do anything with somebody in the first presentation anyway. So you had to sort of stabilize them. But the medication was never the treatment. The medication was what enabled the treatment to happen.
But then there is some element, there is some research that says there's a genetic element with regard to things like depression, and it is a chemical thing. I've also read, we talked about polyvagal theory. You read the stuff about putting electrical stimulants in your vagus nerve. And that's
I know it's after 9 o'clock, but should we really be talking about that?
Listen, it's nothing to do with the vagina. That's a separate menopausal thing we're going to talk about there. But your vagus nerve in your neck, right? Putting electrical stimulants in to stimulate your vagus nerve, polyvagal theory, and it's helping reduce epilepsy fits. It's helping reduce depression.
Without having to cut the corpus callosum. That's a big step forward,
isn't it?
That's because cutting the corpus callosum is a bit radical, or living on those anti-epilepsy medications, which drug you and really affect quality of life, meaning that people don't take them. And I think that's the point I have about the medical interventions, is that, yes, they may work, but they have often, particularly for more serious conditions like, say, psychosis, they have such undesirable side effects that people don't want to use them. Yeah. So, you know, people balloon out, they really don't like it. They totally lose their sex drive, they really don't like it. They appear weird in public because they can't manage their thinking, they really don't like it. So whilst I agree with you that it's true, it's chemistry, it's inheritance, it's biology, but we are, I think, moving more and more into understanding that management of the environment has a huge impact. By environment, what I mean as a psychologist is the relational environment that we're in, the psychological interventions that we can engage with, the behavioural changes that we can take place, and the way we can literally change our environment. So I think it's fairly commonplace these days for most people to have on their computers a night setting. Yes. So my computer's gone to the warmest and got rid of the blue because we know that blue screens keep us awake at night. And so it's that sort of stuff. And I think we're getting more and more complex and subtle around those things. Let me just get rid of this frog.
And it is, I also think, you know, some of these, how am I going to say this? So when I first had depression, I was going through a divorce. I had 2 children who were very young. I was working full time. I didn't have time for psychotherapists. Yeah, I was just, and so I needed.
I totally agree. To
get me through that. And so, you know, we have to be aware of accessibility. And I am concerned there's a lot of elitism around mental health and interventions as well that we have to be wary of.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also think that, you know, we have IAPT, and we're the only country on the planet that does have it, and it's brilliant, and it needs to be rah-rah up there. Again, it's treated in the Cinderella way, and it's often overlooked, but it's absolutely is a unique global service, and the NHS have yet again done something extraordinary. Yes, and we're really shit in this country at singing our praises.
We are. It's British.
There is no other country on the planet that has a primary care evidence-based psychological intervention that you can just phone up right now and they'll call you back within a couple of days and sort you out. It's extraordinary. So, I think we do have that, but I used to be, because I'm old enough, I used to be in that biology, psychology split. And very much in the early days, without saying, you spotted it in me because you're trying to balance me off in what I'm saying, and that's fine. I appreciate it. But I was very much psychology, not biology. Yeah. These days, I absolutely buy into it's both. Yeah. And psychology is learned from biology hugely. What I am cautious of still, though, is primarily biological explanations for things that are whole system events.
Yes. We've got to be careful not to get into the American sort of way of.
There's a tendency in medical science to look to the organ or the gland and that's not what mental well-being is. It's not what psychological well-being is. It's not what a human being is. It's an aspect of that person which is useful to understand, but it's a bit like that psychological sort of research that understands the fatty acid that stops neurogenesis. It's really helpful. Yeah. But it's not what a person is.
Is it going to help me get out of bed in the morning?
Well, exactly. Well, it helped her get out of bed, which is good. But, it doesn't help me. It's not the first thing that comes to mind. Oh, good. I can feel the neurogenesis. It's not.
Hurrah.
Not what? Yes, quite. So I'll touch a little bit upon grief and essentially getting that message out to people, which I totally agree. When I first trained, actually, I trained with the person who ran the course where I trained, Alida Gersi, was a world-renowned expert on grief. And her message to us always was this: grieving is a natural process. Yes. Don't piss around with it.
No. Don't
take away the blocks that stop people grieving.
It's gonna bloody hurt.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you're supporting someone with grief, you can just be there while they're hurting.
Yeah.
And listen to them talk about it over and over and over and over again as they process it. One of the best things I ever heard, and I wish I knew who said it, but the more you tell your story, the shorter it gets.
Yes.
And that's part of the healing process. That's
brilliant. Yes.
And I love that. So, my first divorce, people would say to me, what happened? I go into a 3-hour story of what my husband did and this, that, and the other. And now I'm like, he was just a knobhead and we just weren't right for each other. Yeah. I've healed.
Yeah.
My story is that short.
Yeah. I totally,
and so, totally get it. If you're supporting somebody who's grieving, let them say the same thing over and over again. And if you are grieving, talk about it over and over again, write it down, express your emotions all the time, as much as you possibly can.
And thinking about some of the ritualized public stuff around bereavement and loss and grieving, what's your take on that? Because obviously during the pandemic, there was a significant problem around that.
Yeah. You have to do what works for you.
Okay.
So for some people, faith helps their grieving process. For some people, it doesn't. For some people, having a grave to go and visit helps their grieving process. For some people, it doesn't. It becomes a burden. Yeah. So it is so personal that my message is whatever you're feeling isn't wrong.
Yeah.
And whatever you want to do what you want to do, not others' expectations upon you. And I think we need to, thank God we've moved away from the Victorian era where you're expected to do this, that, and the other. Do what feels right for you, and be around people who are good for you.
It's interesting you talk about Victorians, because I was going to mention it. A lot of the stuff that we think of as mourning is just public health laws that the Victorians brought in.
Yeah,
because we used to not have specific graves. People would be disposing of bodies in the back garden. We'd be horrified of that now, but that just caused cholera outbreaks.
Of course, yeah.
And so that's why we have the rules that we have around graveyards, etc., because if you look at them, they're built away from water sources, and so the Victorians did control it. So those things about graves, in that sense, are not mourning rituals. They are public health edicts, but the capacity to mourn as humans, my understanding is, goes right back to the beginning of human culture, and it's that being able to allow that to happen, I guess.
Yeah. And the grave thing is great, but if it becomes a burden that you have to go and maintain it and put flowers on it, I've said to my kids, when I die, burn me and scatter my ashes wherever you think of me. So my daughter's like, well, that's TK Maxx in the kebab shop then, Mum. And I'm like, okay, I was thinking something more romantic, like the sea.
Not the kebab shop. Seriously. No, tell me where that kebab shop is. I'm going to avoid it.
But I didn't want my gravestone to become something you feel you have to visit. So it's like you feel you have to wear black for 6 months of the year, or you feel it's restrictive, sort of.
So you're not that worried about the lack of access to burial rituals because of the pandemic? You don't think it's necessarily because people have the capacity to mourn in other ways? Yeah,
for some people it is important, because this is what we do, and this helps me move forward. This is what I'm saying. It has to be personal.
Yeah,
but
I'm just thinking about. Like it's been in the news, hasn't it? Yeah. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, and then you're to blame.
A lot of people, because if you think about it, you go to a funeral or a memorial service, everybody talks about them, and the wake always tends to turn into a very laughing, celebratory affair because of the relief and sort of celebrating. So a lot of people were robbed of that, absolutely, and that may complicate them being able to move on, or delay them being able to move on.
Yeah.
But the majority of people will still be able to move on.
Okay. So it's not the event, but it's your relationship to the situation.
Yeah.
Your awareness, internal awareness of what you need to do, and the capacity to engage with that.
What's important to you.
Great.
So is there a ritual that's important to you because of your religion? Then that's fine.
And rituals are broader than religion anyway, aren't they?
Yeah.
Rituals contain meaning when we lose meaning. That's the idea of a ritual. And we can create our own rituals, can't we? When we have a sense of
control. because we feel very out of control when somebody dies.
Yeah.
About. And so having these rituals, it's like for children, having normal life and actually going back to school is massively important for them, because they need to retain that element of normality.
Okay, we're sort of at the end of the show. I told you this would happen. Yeah, I mean, everybody says to me, "We won't fill a whole hour," and it's like, we will. And you'll be saying to me at the end of the hour, "Well, no, I've got more to talk about." We haven't even talked about your sort of menopause stuff yet, so you'll have to come.
Oh God, that's fine.
Yeah, we'll have to come back, because I want to hear about it. I enjoy the fact I'm a bloke. Women. No, I'm look, seriously, this may be sadistic of me, but it's true. I'm going to be honest. I enjoy the fact I don't go through the menopause. There, I've said it. Okay? Kill me.
You have no clue. You are honest to God. Men are pathetic. If having to go through hormones every day, you do that. Honestly, I went to the chemist the other day and they said, "Sam, we've run out of HRT patches." I'm like, "You need to get this stuff in. If not, gather up all the women it affects and send us to the Ukraine. We'll sort it out."
That's right. That's right.
Honestly,
that's the new international brigade of menopausal women is on the way.
I'm going to suggest it
Zelensky.
to the United Nations.
You've sorted it. You've sorted out Ukraine. Well done.
What did you just say to me?
I didn't say anything. Exactly. I can say anything I like because we're on Zoom, so it's.
Yeah, I know where you live now.
You do. I told you. That's important. All right. Listen, we will have to get you back because it only skims the surface, and I sort of would like to go into more depth actually about what you do and why you do it, and particularly around thinking about your experience, how it informs your practice, and we can look at some of the clinical stuff that you do, because I know also that we didn't really talk about it, but you're like me, you're interested in the broader processes in groups as opposed to the dyadic stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I want to explore that with you and how you map psychological knowledge onto those groups and group processes.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic.
That's really important stuff, and it's practical application of psychology. Is what I'm really interested. You know where I tell you where I got that interest from. I'm just going to finish on this anecdote. Is that one of the first people I worked with, therapists I worked with post training? I went up to the Royal Ed, and there was a guy called, oh God, his name's gone. I saw him for 5 years. That's ridiculous. But he was the staff counsellor for the whole trust, right? With 22,000 people in the trust.
Wow, one counsellor.
Neville, his name was. Neville Singh. No, seriously. I mean, they had subsequent to him, they brought in an EAP service, but they kept him because he was one of those unique individuals in life. And he was in days of mobile phones. So with pterodactyls and no mobile phones. And he had a beeper. And he used to always have his beeper on. And so people could literally phone up the switchboard and ask for Neville. They knew who he was, and they put him through to his beeper. He was in a session with you, his beeper would go off, he'd talk to somebody, he'd sort them out, come back to the session. And there was that sense in which there was always an external reality going on to the sessions. It was never a magical, inviolable space where we were. There was always, the real world was there. And I learned something there that was very important about therapy has to be in the real world.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no point to it.
No point to it whatsoever.
It doesn't, unless you can deal with everyday things like somebody calling you and hold that boundary and sort them out while you've got a vulnerable patient on your hands. That it was a masterclass. Each session,
wow,
genius.
Yeah,
and done with no effort whatsoever. Like it always felt safe. It never felt intruded upon. He held it superbly, and I learned a lot from him. I'm really sort of a nice guy, actually, Neville. We're going to finish. We have to finish. So it's really enjoyable to talk to you, Samantha. I haven't been this animated in conversation in ages, so I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Back at you.
Yeah. You've written a book. Quickly show us.
I've written a book. It's for schools, mental health and education. It's about getting your day-to-day practice right.
Great. Teachers, that's a good resource.
Yeah.
Have you got a website?
SamanthaGarner.co.uk. I've got some freebie CBT activities on there for people, for students, and for companies.
Great. So when we send this out on YouTube, we'll put the links to everything on it. I can't put them on now because I'm rubbish. So you stay there. Okay. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody and just toggle off on me restream and turn it off. But bye-bye, everybody, and I'll see you all next week.